Hi, folks. I'm Mike Medea, Head of Education Programs at the American Philosophical Society. If you haven't joined us before for our career chats, that's okay. If you have, thanks for being part of our community. If you need a quick introduction to the APS, though, be sure to check us out on our website or follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So we're here to discuss the many careers offered by an organization like the APS. As a museum, research library, archive, and membership society, we have a great staff who do work ranging from administration to publications. Career Chats showcases these staff members and introduces you to careers that you might not have considered before. We ask these staff members a series of questions during this interview, and if you haven't seen the page for the series, be sure to check it out. There's an option to send us questions about the careers that we discuss, so be sure to submit those. We record the conversations on Tuesdays and we air them on Thursdays, and we'd love to hear from you. Today on Career Chats, I'm here with Jodi, the Reference and Digital Services Specialist at the APS. How are you doing today?
Doing well, Mike, thank you.
All right, so let's hop into the questions. So could you repeat your name and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. My name is Jodi. I'm the Reference and Digital Services Specialist at the APS. I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, right outside of Philadelphia. I went to Bloomsburg University, which is a state school in Pennsylvania. For my undergrad, I got my BA in history. In 2013, I graduated, and then I'm actually about 2 weeks away. I don't want to jinx it, but 2 weeks away from finishing my master's in library science at Drexel.
That's awesome. Congrats on almost finishing, right? 2 weeks.
Yeah, I don't like to talk about it too much. I'm always afraid I'm going to jinx myself, but I think I'm close enough now that it's okay.
Right, that's okay. At least you get the credits for the classes, I'm sure. So Reference and Digital Services Specialist is a pretty, like most things at the APS, it's a long title with a lot kind of packed into it. So what do you do?
So yeah, if I were speaking to my friends or my family, I would try to break it down in one sentence. I would say that I help library patrons understand and gain access to the collections. So that doesn't mean that I'm an expert on any of the collections, but it means I kind of work with them to understand what we have and then to help them access it, whether that's physically or virtually. The unique thing about archives in general is that for the most part they are unique and exist only, the APS archives only exist at our library, so they're not anywhere else. So we have people from all over the country and all over the world who for their research or their project or whatever need access to the collection. So that could require me to explain to them what's in the collection, and then if it does prove that they need to use that, I can set them up with an appointment to come in, and then I can physically bring them the material. But a lot of times what happens is I digitize the material and send it to them. That takes up a lot of my time at work, is digitizing material, sending it to patrons, and then we post that material in our digital library, so then it's available for everyone. So my job is the reference side is kind of helping people understand what we have. The digital services side is kind of digitizing that, making that accessible, and allowing people to have access to the material.
I appreciate the ambition of trying to do it in one sentence, because that's impressive. I haven't. It's so hard to boil all this down.
It was tough. I had to think about it for a long time.
And I like that too, because I think it's like important to acknowledge that, like, though there might be copies of things like, let's say, like the Declaration of Independence, right? Like in newspapers, like other copies, each kind of archive will have its own unique copy too. And part of what you do so well is like knowing what's unique about the APS versions of things. And then also the idea of digitization is kind of wild to me anyway, of just being able to like scan these things in and then provide a digital copy of it and facilitating that access, like you said so well.
Yeah, exactly right. So now there's certain things that you can only get from physically handling something. I understand that, but to be able to, I mean, for example, we have Benjamin Franklin material that's nowhere else in the world. Mm-hmm. And if you're a Franklin researcher on the West Coast or in Europe or whatever, to be able to just, with a few clicks, access that material, even if it's just a digital copy, like is really fantastic. And if I really feel like I'm helping people out if I'm able to do that. So that like idea of service and helping people while also just getting to deal with really cool material is what I love about my job.
And so Does that work tend to be solo or usually as a team?
So it's actually interesting. A lot of it starts off solo, right? Like a reference request will come in, like, what do you have in this collection? Or can you tell me about this specific letter? But it winds up being fairly collaborative at a certain point because I'll be the first to admit I'm far from a specialist. I'm far from an expert in any of these things. There's so many APS staff members who are not only much more knowledgeable than I am, but really willing to help. So depending on where the request falls, if it's Native American material, I'll go to CNAIR. If it's printed material, I'll go somewhere else. If it's manuscript material. So depending on what the request is and how in depth it gets, it really takes me all over the APS looking for help and assistance, and everyone's always obviously so willing to help and proves very helpful. So it actually strikes, for me at least, a really nice balance between the solo work and then also there's a nice bit of collaboration as well.
Great. And this kind of ties into the next question too, because this is why I like the reference part of your title, because often if I have no idea who to go to, like you and maybe one other staff member or who I go to about like, where do I find this thing and who do I talk to about this? Because I have no idea. And the reference part is really helpful there. But also, how long have you been with the APS?
So I've been at the APS, I started January of 2015. So it's been about 5.5 years or so. I started at the APS as the position was library technical assistant. So I essentially like staffed the front desk of the library there. So I interacted with tourists, researchers who were coming in. I kind of got them set up and explained to them like library and reading room policies and procedures. And I started some digitization work and a little bit of reference work in that regard. But that was, so the library technical assistant at front desk was kind of the most entry level position at the APS. And it was a perfect introduction to not only the APS, but kind of libraries and archives for me. It proved great for me. So I worked from 2015 to the end of 2018 at the front desk, and then I moved into the position I'm in now in January of 2019. But yeah, it's probably the most entry level position at the APS, and it was a great introduction into kind of libraries and archives, and it was excellent for me.
And it's great to like similarly like find an organization that lets you like come in that level and then grow with the organization.
Oh,
Which is great.
Yeah, amazing. Like I feel so fortunate. I would feel so fortunate to be at the APS and to be able to advance was just, I mean, I didn't even expect that, but I've been very fortunate, feel very lucky.
So to switch off of the APS, what did you do before working at the society?
So before I was at the APS, I worked in visitor services at the Penn Museum. Okay. So I graduated from Bloomsburg with a history degree in 2013. We will talk more about that, but I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do. I got this job in visitor services at the Penn Museum, and I was also, so that job was a lot of weekends, kind of random hours and stuff. I always had Mondays off because the museum was closed Mondays after being open all weekend. So I would go in and volunteer at, so I grew up in Doylestown, and the Mercer Museum is there.
Cool.
Which is a really cool museum, but also in there on the third floor of the museum is the Spruance Library, which is the library of the Bucks County Historical Society. And so I would go in and volunteer there. I had done an internship there in college. That was my first introduction into a research library, archives of any kind. And so I kept going back and volunteering there. And it was kind of my experience kind of matched up perfectly with when I saw the posting for the job at the APS for the front desk. It was a lot of public service, which I got from the Penn Museum job, and then some library experience, which I had. So I was very lucky. I just was kind of looking around for jobs, for a full-time job, and that came up, and it seemed like it kind of was perfect for me. And so I applied, and I was really like the Penn Museum was great, but the volunteering was excellent. I mean, it's tough to volunteer, right? If you obviously need to work, but if you can even just do it like an afternoon a week or a day a week, for me, I never thought I was going to get a job at that institution, but it was great experience. And I made some great contacts. Two of the people I worked with provided references for me for the APS job. So a lot of, particularly like libraries and archives a lot of them are small and reliant on volunteers. So it's a great way to kind of get your foot in the door, get some experience and make some contacts that way. So I was really lucky that that happened.
Yeah, and so much of what you said is so applicable to like a lot of things, right? Where you kind of clobber together a set of experiences and skills that, because you've clobbered them together, don't seem like they could connect to one full-time thing, but they end up making sense together. Like the visitor services job with volunteering, if you combine all of that, that equals, like you said, the APS job. So it works out in the end.
Exactly right. I didn't even know this job existed, and all of a sudden I'm on a job board and there's like a perfect combination of my experiences, you know what I mean? So yeah, just lucky and timed out.
And then the volunteer too. And it's a good kind of like through line for these with it's a kind of privileged position to be able to volunteer or like intern without pay. But like you said, like a lot of these places are small, especially if you're coming from like a smaller county in like Philadelphia where the resources might exist. Sure. And volunteering for an hour a week might give you those connections and those kinds of like reference and building skills too.
Exactly right. Like it's not necessarily realistic to to volunteer 40 hours a week or even a full day a week if you have a job, but even just an afternoon a week just to get your foot in the door, as I said, I mean, could be really important.
Yeah. So did you learn about this field of work while you were an undergrad, or did you learn about it through this kind of experiences after undergrad?
So it was late in my undergrad education. So coming out of high school, I decided to study history. I really wasn't sure. That was my favorite class in high school, and so I was like, oh, well, whatever, I'll study history. Assuming I'd be maybe a history teacher. I guess that's all I really knew that people who study history could do. And then the summer in between my junior and senior year of undergrad, we had to do an internship, which I thought was curious, and I stumbled upon one at the Mercer Museum's library, and that was my first introduction. When I thought of libraries before, I just thought of like public libraries, right? I'd never ever thought of a research library and archive where people were kind of digging through stuff, digging through manuscript records. So that was my first introduction to it, and I loved it. I loved the kind of academic vibe, but it was still, there was a service aspect to what the librarians and the archivists were doing. There were people there doing family history. It was like people were very passionate. It was such a cool experience for me. So that internship really opened my eyes to a field that I didn't even know existed. And the kind of, I kind of started to try and go that direction with my career, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's so true that like you kind of start in this place where like the history field and these kinds of fields are like, we have a limited scope of vision on them until you find something like that internship or the APS, and then it's like everything starts to unfurl very quickly about about the discovery of these jobs and these fields and these people that work here. It's so true.
Yeah.
So for a position like yours, what would you say the education experience expectations are?
So for my first position at the APS,
yeah.
the library technical assistant, it was a BA, and then some public service experience. I think the library experience was a plus. I don't know if that was 100% necessary, but certainly some public service experience. And public service, yeah, the museum job I had really helped, but even like some customer service jobs I had through like high school and summers in college really helped. Like any kind of interacting with the public proved useful, but certainly the museum experience, interacting with visitors and working with the education staff at the Penn Museum really helped. But so those were the two, kind of just a BA and some public service experience. The position I'm in now, the reference and digital services, I would say that in most instances, it would be expected that you would have your either library degree or public history degree, so an advanced degree. I was lucky enough that at the APS, they knew I was going back for that and was able to kind of move into the position before I officially had my degree. But most reference librarians are in fact librarians and have their library degree. and then at least a few years of experience working with libraries and archives.
That makes a whole lot of sense. I think that ties into like the specialists and like the reference and all the other parts of your job that like you would have that extra degree. But I think it is important to like also realize too, right? Like a lot of people might head into those jobs with that degree in hand, but I think you've done like things very smartly where like you got the degree while you were working at the organization too. So like it adds on like an experience level, it adds on a practicality level of like being able to work and do the degree at the same time. Like I think it just makes so much sense too and provides like a different option of sorts.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's that's one of the things I wanted to talk about was I came back my senior year after having that internship and after having kind of my eyes open to this career that or at least field that thought I wanted to explore more. And I had in my head that I wanted to go to grad school, but I really wasn't sure exactly for what. There was public history programs, there was library programs. And so I decided to wait and see at least what the field was like, which I'm really glad I did. So it was 5 years in between when I finished my undergrad in 2013 and when I started my graduate degree at Drexel in 2018. And I really, I mean, it's not the case for everyone, but for me, it was nice to see what was out there. And after working at the APS for a couple of years, I was like, you know what, I think it could really benefit me to go back and get my library degree. But I don't think I would have been well informed enough to make a smart decision right out of undergrad. I think if I went to graduate school right after undergrad, it would have just been kind of just to go, you know, and that works for some people and that's fine. But for me, I liked getting into, it was really useful to get into the field to kind of figure out exactly what I liked, what was out there, and what education choice made sense for my career path at that time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's so important as part of the series to talk about those other kind of like paths too, because I think everybody has it in their head that like, cool, undergrad, check, grad degree, check, job now. It doesn't have to be like that at all. There should be like a set of options and paths, especially in a weird and specialized field like ours, where you should try it out first to make sure that this is something that you want before investing in that degree.
Yeah, it's a fairly niche field, and you don't want to just jump right into it. And the fact of the matter is, a graduate degree is a huge financial and time investment. But it's one of the things I liked about the APS right away was there were the people from different education backgrounds. Some people went and got their master's when they were in their late 20s, 30s. Some had just recently had it. So in your head, at least for me, in high school and college, I thought like, yeah, you graduated high school at 18, undergrad at 22, and then you had your master's by 24, or else you weren't going to get it. But that's obviously not the case. You can always go back whenever. And I think it's almost more responsible to test out the waters a little bit and make sure that that's what you really want before you invest all this time and money into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that segues nicely into the next question of what are the pros and cons of this kind of job?
So the pros, I talked about a little bit. I get to deal with really interesting material. Now, the APS obviously has some of the most interesting, like early American history material, history of science stuff, but any archive is going to, if you're interested in history, if you're interested in past and telling stories, you get to deal with those type of things. And then you get to, especially from the reference perspective, help people. Like, I really feel like, I'm not, my wife is an ICU nurse and she's literally saving lives. So that helps provide like a perspective for me, but I do feel like I'm helping people with their research projects and getting them material that they need. And usually people are so thankful. So that like service aspect of it in combination with work that's intellectually stimulating is really what my favorite aspect of the job is. I feel like in a small way, I'm helping people.
Yeah. Especially too by the point in time they get to you usually. And like, I like thinking about like these things on the continuums, right? Of like, they might come to like an education person either because they're already interested or like because they're totally new to this thing and like I'm talking to them for the first time. But in your position, they get to you because they're already so interested and like they know that they need something that it's like, it's a totally different interaction too. So like you get them like they're hyper excited about being able to find this thing at the APS too, which I think is such a fun dynamic to have.
Yeah, it really is excellent. And so a lot of it comes through we have a reference email that I handle, but when people contact us, a lot of times it's not specifically to me, it's to the reference staff. And they could have been looking all over the world for this certain document and they've realized we have it and found it and are asking for us to digitize it. And it could take me literally 2 minutes to digitize it and send it to them, but they are so unbelievably grateful, and I kind of get to reap the benefits of that, and it really is a nice feeling.
Yeah. So for the downside, though, what are, what are the cons of the job?
I really thought about this. I don't want to sound like too positive. I mean, you're never going to be a millionaire working in this type of field. I think that's obvious. I've accepted I'm never going to be a millionaire and kind of moved on. That's really the con I can think of. I mean, I'm sure there are others, but on the flip side of that, though, I do think, at least at the APS in particular, and I could be naive, I think it does promote a solid work-life balance. I think there's some nice things. Like the part of the reason I love my job is in the APS and archives and libraries, there's a certain academic vibe to it that I really think suits me well. And even on days when I feel super stressed out, there's a lot going on. As I said, my wife's an ICU nurse, and it's nice she'll come home and tell me about her 14-hour shift, and it puts things in perspective. So
good balance there. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's good to hear that every once in a while.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing too, right? Where like on this series of things, I might talk to somebody, and the cons are so hefty that maybe the one or two pros has to be like amazing to balance that out, right? But the pros and cons should be individual and on an individual basis. It's your career,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It shouldn't be somebody else's cons or your cons. So I think that's a helpful kind of like point, right, to be made. So this is the point in the conversation where we kind of shift for a little bit and talk a bit about younger Joe. So what were you like in high school?
So in high school, I was a fine student. I was probably maybe a B student. I was not very driven. If there was a paper due Monday morning, I was probably starting it Sunday night. If there was a test Monday morning, I was probably starting to study Sunday night. I was on the basketball team. That was probably, I think, what was most important for me at the time. I knew that I would go to college because that's what people did, and that's what I think I wanted to do, but I wasn't like thinking really about majors or career paths or anything. But I think the point of that, at least what I would want people to take from that, is like you're not even close to your finished self in high school. You know what I mean? You're still figuring things out. I was an okay student in high school. I got to undergrad. I matured. I improved a little bit. And then by the time I got to grad school, I had more self-discipline, better organizational skills, and was a pretty good student, or a good student. So I think the point that I would take from talking about my high school self is that I didn't have anything close to figured out. I was fine, but I wasn't really thinking about my career. I didn't even know the career I'm in right now existed, let alone that I wanted to do it. So I was a fine student. I was not particularly driven, or if you told me I would be a reference librarian in 10, 12 years, I would have probably laughed.
Like, what is that
Yeah,
anyway?
I probably assumed at one point I did just like work in a cubicle or something. I don't know.
I think what, and I'm probably gonna butcher how you said this, but like something about like how you're not your fully formed self when you're in high school is such a good thing, right? Like you are formed enough to kind of like move you through the next phases of life, but a lot of you does change. So like that's why I like this question, because I want people to know that like you don't need to have it all figured out in high school. You don't even need to be remotely like yourself like right now when you were in high school, and that's part of life. That is part of changing. That's part of growing up and the maturation process.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's not saying that me right now is some like you grow and mature, and that leads to you making better decisions. And it's funny, I think about now with like my experience in grad school, and I feel like I'm a little more self-disciplined and organized. I wonder like, oh, if I went back to high school as this self, how would I do? But that kind of defeats the point. The point is the 10 years of experience kind of taught me those things. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's a journey, and you know.
Yeah. And so you did answer part of the question too, of like what you thought you would be doing in high school. And I have a feel like, as you said, we probably didn't even know what a reference and digital services specialist was in high school anyway, right? So that kind of jumps us ahead to what were you like in undergrad?
So in undergrad, I still wouldn't call myself very driven. I improved. Each year of college, I got a little bit better as a student. Started to, I think, become a little more disciplined, a little more organized, but I didn't know, as I said, the career field that I was interested in existed until like my senior year. So it was definitely a step up from high school. I was improving, but I was still a little probably goofy and figuring things out. But once I had that internship in senior year, I remember coming back and being a little more focused and being like, okay, I have enough, because there's something very like exciting about finding something that you potentially like would want to do for the rest of your life, right? Like I think the first 3 years I was like, yeah, I'll be a teacher, but I was never passionate about that. And all of a sudden I had this internship. I saw people that kind of reminded me of myself working there. I could see myself going into a place like that every day. And all of a sudden I think that was a big turning point for me, and like really like led me to maybe crack down a little more at school and be a little more disciplined, because I could picture it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, again, there was so much in there. Of like once you find that focus, that's part of what drives you, right? So like when you have these vague ideas, or like when it's kind of from a perspective that isn't your own either, or if like somebody's telling you that like you're just going to be a teacher, that doesn't give you drive or energy to kind of like focus and do these things, right? But also like you said, finding your people essentially, right? Like so like once you do find that you are amongst people that you want to be like, people that like you think you are like, it also helps make that career seem like realistic and helpful and productive for you too. So I those are both really great takeaways, I think, and highly helpful. So what would you say was your aha moment with this career trajectory?
You know, the initial one was certainly just like getting an experience in a library like that, and just being exposed to it, and realizing I think this is where I want to be, where I want to work, where I want my career to go. So that was like, I guess that's the aha moment. But then I would say it was really solidified at the APS. So I started at the APS in 2015, working at the front desk. I got to work with some library stuff, and it was really an introduction to like a real world-class library and archives. And that was, if the internship was like the aha moment, this like really solidified that this is the field I want to work in. And that's when I made the decision that I think it's going to be a good choice to go back to school for library science. And this is kind of really where I want to invest my time. So those two in combination, I guess, were the two important moments in my kind of career path.
Yeah, I like breaking it up into two moments too, because I think that's another helpful kind of perspective to have, because it can seem like with this question you have your one moment and that's it. That's where it ends. But it could be multi-layered.
Yeah, and it's funny, like thinking back on it, I think of that as an aha moment, but I'm sure that it took me, in my internship even, it unfolded much slower than that in real time, right? Probably took me a couple of weeks, and I'm really enjoying this, and you know what, I think this is what I want to do. So like, you're not necessarily going to have one moment where like it's like a lightning bolt, like this is it, but like it's going to unfold a little slower than that. But yeah, I think that's right. It's not necessarily, it could be a more of a process than just one specific moment. But those were the two kind of moments, if you will, that really were important to me.
That's great. So usually, right, like I think our fields are pretty open and helpful, and like people trying to discover these career trajectories and such. So say I'm a student asking you to do an informational interview. Do you have any questions that you love being asked about your job, or any like kind of pet peeves for informational interviews?
Not any pet peeves. I mean, I think I would be excited to be asked anything. You know, I feel passionate about my work and how interesting it is, and I would be happy to share anything. I would suggest to people who are looking for information, to any questions you have. This is a big opportunity for you. Like, it's your career. If you think this might be a field that you want to be in, I would ask anything that, I mean, obviously maybe don't ask them exactly how much money they make or something like that, but like finance is important. Those things are important. Like anything that comes up, I would say in a polite, kind way, like at least try and have that talked about, because this is as important for them as anyone, right?
And that's so helpful too, because I think there's a part of like informational interviews where you can approach them as like a blanket kind of thing, right? Of like, cool, I'm ticking this box, I'm learning about this career, yay, fun. But then you kind of lose sight of like, you're interviewing an individual, and you need to kind of like read the room, read the emails, like read like into things too, because like you can, like some other staff members at APS are like, yeah, ask me my salary, I'll tell you in like 2 seconds, but like that's not how every single person will react. That's not how every like, so that's helpful to like act like read into who you're interviewing. That's a helpful thing.
Yeah. And I also think when I didn't do too many, but I did a few informational interviews, and it's almost like you're so thankful that this person is giving you the time that you almost you just want to be as polite as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But like, that's an important time for you to figure some things out that could, part of internships and volunteering and information interviews are as much about figuring out what you like as figuring out what you don't like. And if there's some questions that you have or some concerns that you have, that's an important time to bring that up, you know?
Yeah, because people will be honest with you if you ask those questions, and that's so important to do. It's your career. It's not like, right, so it's important to take stock of that.
Mm-hmm.
So out of the final two questions, I find this one to be like the kind of like trickier one, right? How do you see your field changing in the next 10 years?
So it's interesting. Even in the 5 years I've been at the APS, the digital aspect to like our digital library's grown. We've gotten more access. The digital nature of providing access has grown. So I think in 10 years that the digital side of things will obviously grow. I mean, that's the answer to anything in 10 years. But what I think is cool, at least in my opinion, and this could be just because I'm finishing up library school, but a lot of like the pillars of librarianship and archives I think will stay similar, that service, that providing access, preserving things for people to use. I think some of those things will always be pillars of the field, no matter where the technology goes and no matter who the clientele is. I think some of those important pillars of the field will stay the same, but certainly the way we provide access and the way we communicate with people will change. Like, for example, most of my reference interactions now are virtual, either through like the web form or through emails. That I rarely get phone calls, but it's still at its core, I'm trying to provide reference service to people and help people understand our collections, and I don't think that's going to change.
Yeah, that is ridiculously helpful to kind of keep in the back of anybody's mind, is that no matter how technologically advanced or like tech savvy or tech heavy the career might be, there are parts of that where you're still going to have to deal with other people, no matter what. So like having those kind of like customer service, patron service skills, it's invaluable to have those, no matter what.
Yeah, it really is. And there's always going to be some of that, as you said. So I mentioned that I rarely get phone calls. And partly it's funny, having the virtual nature of reference is useful because, as I said, I'm far from an expert, and it allows you to collect your thoughts a little bit. But there's something pleasant about having a phone call with somebody who's calling from Virginia and is doing genealogical research, and you have to have a conversation with them. And at least in my experience, people are very understanding, and as long as you're open, but there's something so important about that, like human to human interaction, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so it's the final question, and I'll work on pulling it up while you start explaining it, but what's one APS object that really demonstrates your work?
So the object that I picked is a digital version of a physical object at the APS. So this is Madame Brionne, one of her musical compositions. I believe it's a sonata for the piano. So Madame Brionne was a 18th century French musician, playwright. She was a salon hostess, friend of Franklin, really interesting person. But the reason I picked this object was, I mean, it's handwritten musical notes. It's pretty cool, but the digital nature of it, I think, kind of encapsulates what I really like about my job. So the physical object here that has been digitized is in a vault in Philadelphia, like locked away. And yes,
actually in a vault in Philadelphia, literally locked away.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And you could certainly come to the reading room and we would page it for you, and that's fine. But because of the work I've done, this is now, with a couple clicks, anybody in the world can view this and can read this and take a look at this cool item. And there's something about that I really like, and it's kind of the essence of why I love my job and what I find so interesting about the combination of reference and then digitization that I kind of do every day. So the digital nature of a physical object, being able to share it, to provide access. Obviously, it's not the same as having this in your hands, but it's I really like the ability to increase access with the digital nature of objects.
I do love that too, because like the longer kind of like quarantine things happen, I find myself more on the digital library looking for random things, and it's like somebody had to do all of that and provide that access to that, and it's such a fun thing to have to just like search up these random things on an APS collection website and find like a wax figure of Thomas Paine or a sonata. Like they're all kind of cool and fun to find. It's a core part of your work. It's fun.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, I know I've talked about it a bit, but that's just my favorite thing is, so that's really, I mean, it might be a small group of people, but for some researchers that some of those things are really important, and if that you can provide access to them without them having to travel to Philadelphia or whatever, then that's, I think, it can be really important.
Right. And I think that's a fantastic note to end on. So thank you so much, Joe, for being on Career Chats. I loved so much of this, but I think with your personal takeaways of like the aha moments to kind of like knowing who you are in high school and how you develop are so meaningful for the context of these conversations. So thank you. And remember, everybody, to check out our Career Chats page for more information on who's coming up next and how to submit your questions. So thanks from me, the APS, and Joe for joining.
Thank you.